Hi, my name is Rachel McLeod. I'm a licensed clinical social worker and emotional wellness coach. And today I'm going to be talking with you about why talk therapy fails to eliminate symptoms of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress. And the one thing you can do to create, the one switch you can make to create, no, I'm going to have to read this. And the one switch you can make to cut your healing journey to a fraction of the time. And this is really an important thing for me because I am someone who has suffered from a raging anxiety disorder, and it was very painful. It was very confusing. I, I had to not only move that anxiety disorder into remission, but also deal with the trauma of having had some of those really painful mental health experiences. And, when I was going through that, eliminating symptoms was my top priority. And my anxiety disorder was the very first disorder I have ever moved into remission, and it took me a lot longer than it takes me now. Then it took me about 3 years, and then I went after the trauma, which took me another 7 because I was kind of waltzing my way through and didn't know what I was doing and didn't know what I needed to do or if I needed to do anything, and so it took me quite a bit of time, and that's okay, right? Better late than never. But as I have continued to do this work, and as I've continued to take on clients, and I've continued to work with people, it's really become apparent to me that our expectations are really off on what can be accomplished in what time frame. And a lot of that is because we're using an intervention like talk therapy, which I'm going to tell you, we're going to talk about why that doesn't work, and why that will help for support, and why that will help with a lot of things, but it doesn't work to eliminate symptoms. And my heater is driving me nuts, so I'm going to turn that off. Hold on. I don't know if I dare turn it off. I don't know if I dare turn it off because I don't like to be cold. But let's see, where was I? So we're going to talk about why talk therapy doesn't work, because I've been having a lot of clients talk with me about the frustrations that they had, or they've been comparing what I do with the years that they spent in talk therapy, and they're just like, why has this been such a short amount of time? I connected with someone recently, and I'm talking to lots of people, but they were really frustrated because they knew exactly why they were having the symptoms that they had. That they know exactly where their PTSD comes from. They know why they have anxiety, and the piece is they don't know how to make it stop, really. And that's really the most important piece. And I was talking to a relative of mine recently, and we were talking about this, and they wanted to know why this was happening. And I don't know why this was happening, but I will tell you what, if you can shift it, all of a sudden you get to move that information from your survival center into your thinking center, and your brain will tell you why that's happening, because all of a sudden now you can actually think about it. Now you can go through the healing processes. And they were like, no, I want to know first, and then I'll think about what I'm going to do about it, whatever, right? But we don't necessarily need to know all the whys and the hows, and we don't even need to understand where our symptoms are coming from, which I know sounds crazy time to you. I wrote this on my hand today because the idea came to me of what I was going to talk about, and it's distracting me everywhere. This is why I don't write on my hands. Notes. Anyway, but a lot of us want to know why, but let me tell you what, it's really much more fun to figure out why after your heart stops racing, after the panic attack stops, after you stop losing your mind, after you stop falling asleep because your brain shuts you down, after you stop running, after you stop the fleeing. When you can get out of the limbic state, then it's interesting to look at stuff and see why this is happening. Beforehand, you're just caught in a cycle of not healing, and your survival center is going off, and it's creating all these symptoms, and you're having panic attacks just because of how brains function. And I've gotten a little out of myself here because I went on that talk, but really, so that's really something that I think people don't understand, and I think many people in my field don't understand this. I don't know why. Why? Because it's out there. You read a couple books, go to a couple trainings, which we're mandated to go to. So I don't know what's really happening here. But the deal is that talk therapy doesn't work to eliminate symptoms at the rate directly, right? It's a very indirect way. And so let's talk about why, and let's talk about the understanding of what's going on there so that you can see for yourself why this is a trap. And you'll be able to see for yourself why the route that I teach people is cuts the healing journey into a fraction of the time. And it really does. I've been working with a client for 7 weeks now, and we've eliminated her panic attacks. We've got her inner critic turned into her healthy inner guidance. We've got what else? She's setting boundaries that used to be blocked. Her self-esteem is higher. She's no longer terrified. She no longer thinks that she needs to protect people from her, right? There's all these things that we've already worked through. It's only been 7 weeks. I want you to expand your thinking, and I want you to understand that this is not a 2-year commitment. Going from dysfunctional to functional is not a 2-year commitment, even if you've got the most severe complex trauma. Okay, and so I'm going out there on a limb to say that. And Rena, I appreciate the cheering and the dead on. That's the real truth. And so hear me out. This is how it works. Okay. So talk therapy is working with your prefrontal cortex. This is where your executive functioning is. This is where your morals, your planning, your problem solving, your talking. I think the talking's in there. I'm going to learn all that stuff here soon, right? But talking, anyway, it's a talking center. So your executive functioning is right in there. This is the thinking part of the brain. This is where where we're learning, right? This is a big piece. This is actually the part of your brain that will do all of your healing work. And so it really, the temptation is to talk with this part directly, because this is the talking center. This is the one that reasons. There we go. That's what I was looking for. This is the reasoning center, the thinking center, all that stuff. And so we're so tempted to get up in here and to address this part of the brain. This is where we logic. This is where we talk about numbers and stats. And this is where we do all of that stuff. And because this is the healing part of the brain, we think, well, we'll just work with this part of the brain. And this part of the brain uses words, and it uses talking, and it upgrades and it grows based on talking. And that's when we're reading when we're reading self-help books, where this is a strategy that works with our thinking center. We're like, oh, that's why, that makes so much sense. And we're learning, but that doesn't stop the symptoms. It doesn't stop the anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress. We're just learning more. We're like, oh, I get it. We're putting all this stuff in there, right? And we think we're doing something because we're doing something. And we're getting clarity, but it doesn't stop us from snapping at our children. It doesn't stop us from doubting ourselves. It doesn't stop us from having panic attacks. It doesn't stop us from having flashbacks. And we spend years reading books because we're doing something. We're noticing changes. We're noticing that we understand more. We're noticing that we have the right ideas, right? And we can spend years right here addressing this part of the brain. When we go to talk therapy, that's what we're working on. And what's one of the best things that happens with talk therapy is that you're putting thoughts and words into feelings. This actually will activate this part of the brain to start secreting calming chemicals to your survival center. And that is a great form of brain work, but it's slower than I like, right? I like faster. In talk therapy, what you get, the best things you can get out of talk therapy is having support. And that's really what it's wonderful about there. There's some fabulous talk therapists that they specialize in supporting people, and that's phenomenal. Get you one of those if you want one of those, but don't expect them to eliminate your symptoms of anxiety, depression, or traumatic stress. That's a different function, and here is why. This is the part of the brain that does the healing work, right? And it makes sense to go there, but it's not the part of the brain that blocks the healing work. It's not the part of the brain that gets the information first. It's not the part of the brain that that gets to hear things first. It's not the part of the brain that gets to feel feelings first. It's the feelings of tactile sensation. It's not the part of the brain that gets to smell. They get the information from your smeller first. It doesn't get stuff first. The survival center gets that information first. It decides if it can go up to the healing process, or if it's derailed and put into a quarantine where the survival system can keep the entire body safe from whatever information was received, whether it was a smell that reminded them of abuse, or whether it was a look that is associated with abandonment, right? A phrase that is associated with panic, right? The survival center decides which path all the information we're receiving will take. And you don't get to think about it. You don't get to get it in there if it decides it's dangerous. And what happens with our triggers, what happens with stuff that's so painful or we don't understand it or it's confusing, the survival center says, oh, we can't have this. This can't get up. This can't go through the healing pathways. We'll die, because it's very dramatic. Because it cares about keeping the body alive. That's its job, and you can't reason with it because it's not, the survival center is not a reasoning center. Reasoning is too slow to keep us alive if we need our survival center. And so it's a short circuit, and it just goes straight into fight, flight, freeze, or faint. And so when when it makes these decisions, it's done. It happens very fast. If it goes into quarantine in a safe place, or if it's allowed through the healing pathways so that it gets into your thinking center and you get to do all the healing work with it. And so what happens is this part is ready to go. It's ready to heal. It's ready to do any of the work you put it to. But it has to get the information first. It has to be able to touch on what the problem is in order for it to heal it. And the part that blocks it from doing that is your survival center, right? And this part of the brain doesn't have words. It doesn't reason. It doesn't care about what you think. It doesn't care about what you know. It doesn't care what your plan is. It just cares if you're going to stay alive or not. And it decides. It's kind of like a big boss daddy or something, no, you can't go to the prom because I just said no, it's like, it's not reasonable, and it's really frustrating. And it's really one of the things that makes people really angry and frustrated is because they know that they're not in danger right now. They know that there's nothing to panic about. They know that there's nothing to be irritable about. They're like, why am I yelling? Why am I snapping at my kids? And they know this is not what they planned on doing. This is not who they planned on being. And this is not what they planned on saying. But all of a sudden, they're out of control. And guess what? You are out of control, because that part of the brain doesn't care what you think, and you cannot consult with it, and you do not get to derail it, and you don't get to do anything with it if you don't know how to work with it. However, what happens is that, and this is a decision I made a while ago, and this is one of the reasons why my clients get fabulous results quickly, is I decided I'm not going to work with this part of the brain. And most of my clients, this part of the brain is working wonderfully, right? People are going to have doctorates, masters, degrees of all kinds, starting businesses, parenting children beautifully, reading books, right? If you're reading books and retaining information, that guy's working. If you can tell some stories later, that's working, right? I don't have to do anything in there usually. Like, I have to do something with this part of the brain 2% of the time. Maybe 3% of the time, maybe 5% if we're being generous. But that's not where people have problems. They have problems because they can't get the information from the survival center through the healing pathways into their prefrontal cortex. Does that make sense? And so that's really all I do. I really just have all my strategies, which are easy to learn. The only thing I do is I help people get the information from the survival center into the thinking center. This survival center blocks people from healing for entire lifetimes. Okay? Lifetimes. That block time does not heal that. And because you have bitter relatives that have gone to the grave with their hurt. You just know. You've been there, And if you're waiting for this to unblock, don't. That is the worst mistake you can make, is to wait for your inner healer to be able to get it. It can't. This part of the brain is so powerful. It's the part of the brain that, like I say all the time, if you touch a hot pot, your survival center is what makes you let it go in an instant so it doesn't burn your hand off. It does the same thing with your inner healer. And your inner healer is anytime you relax, right? Or whenever it can, it wants to go over into the area of quarantine and grab stuff up and put it through. It's like, oh, I need this. And it tries to put it through. And your inner healer, the second it grabs it, your survival center makes it let it go impulsively, without this part being able to think about it or choose. So it has to let it go all the time and come back. And then it's like, I'm empty-handed. And so then it's got to go back again. And it constantly happens. But just like when we get burnt by the stuff we're holding, and we have to let it go, and we're like, that's the same thing that happens with our memories. We go in there and our inner healer that's compulsively is doing this hundreds of times a day. It's going in there and it's trying to grab stuff, and it's activating emotional agony. And that's what signals the survival center to make it drop it and get out of there. So 100 times a day, it's trying to get in there and do this work, and it's activating emotional agony, right? And if you've got a lot of stuff in there, this part of the brain is just even more aggressive. It's more certain that it's got to get in there and do it, and it's touching all your stuff, and you're walking around and your brain's on fire because it hurts so bad. And you may not even be aware of this anymore, that it's actually hurting. You might not be aware that it's the agony of guilt. It's the agony of grief. It's the agony of loss. It's the agony of shame. These things to your survival center are just as deadly as a hot pot. It's just as horrible as that. And so this part of the brain can't get in there to do the healing work. And it keeps getting kicked out. It keeps getting kicked out. But let me tell you what, this part of the brain is so fast. It's electrical, number one, and it works at lightning speed. When you can get the information right there, done. It's phenomenal. I love watching it. You know me. I nerd out about that. But once that information gets in there, the work is done. My work is done. My goal is let's get more in there. Go. While we're working with the survival center and getting to chill out, let's let this guy get in there and grab some stuff, right? My also thoughts is that you take one of these things over here in the survival land, quarantine, and you desensitize it so that it won't activate pain. So that way, when it gets touched, your survival center doesn't know that pain has happened, and so it will just let it sneak right by and into your healing pathways. I like both analogies. But they're either way, it's the same process, and it's very effective because once this part of the brain can do what it does, it starts happening fast. My first experiment with this that was very dramatic, and not myself because I had my own, but I was like, well, let's just see, was I have a relative that had a worm phobia for 50 years. I think it was 50 because it was 10 years ago. Okay, that might be a little long. 45 years, right? And their siblings used to chase them around with worms, and they would, the kind of phobia where they're screaming and they're irrational and they're, right? And I talked them into letting me try this. I was taking a training. It said it was good for phobias, and I'm like, let's see. And phobias are, you go into a limbic state when you come into contact or into the thought even of the source of your phobia, and you go into a limbic state of either fight, flight, freeze, or faint, right? That's why some people will faint in front of theirs. People will fight or become hysterical and start crying, and all those things over a worm, right? That's not accurate, right? That's not the reaction doesn't equal to the actual danger, right? It's a misinterpretation that the brain makes, but it's habitual and there's a pattern involved, and it's automatic, and there's no reasoning with it, right? But they let me do this with them, and I said, you don't have to hold the worm. Let's just see what happens. But if you want to touch the worm, you can touch the worm. They were like, whatever, dude. No. So, but in 10 minutes, they were happily holding a worm that I didn't say, like, you should hold the worm. They were just like, well, maybe I could hold the worm, And I was like, well, maybe you can. So I just was, next thing I know, they're holding the worm. And 10 years later, they're still holding the worm because it got through the healing pathways And this part of the brain upgraded the survival system. And it taught the survival center that what we were flagged as dangerous isn't really, so let's upgrade that and make sure we're accurate now. And so it's, once that communicate, that part of the brain can do that. That's how you get an upgrade in your survival center in your subconscious mind, is through your thinking center. And when you remove the blocks that are in place, it happens very, very, very fast. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful process, and it's permanent. That's really cool too, because you don't have to undo the work that you don't have to redo the work that you did. Now, with why it took 10 minutes to deal with the worm phobia is because there were these things, they're complex however complex they are, but there's lots of thoughts associated with them, and each thought has to be addressed, or each thought has to be resolved. Because some thoughts you resolve one and you fix one and it will resolve 10. Right? So sometimes you don't have to do all the work. It's nice. Just kind of tune into the brain, see what's happening. And so some issues, you have to keep working on the issue, right? And you need to know how to work on the issue, because once the issue is done, it goes through and it's no longer an issue. The symptoms go away. They're eliminated. They're done. Right? And when you get these things at the root, the brain doesn't recreate them. It just doesn't. Sometimes you have to do new layers because you go into new territories, but that's really the difference between really this work is really getting stuff from dysfunction to function, but there's also getting into the positive, right? There's brain tricks to get into the positive, working through fear of success, right? But that's the keeping the brain functioning when you're being functional, right? And that's an awesome thing to do. But what we're talking about right now is working through dysfunction so you can even get there, right? It's just cool because it's the same strategies. Once you know how to do this, you can do this for anything. Once you restore your function, then you can start boosting your function. And it's the same process, because now you know how to work with the subconscious and the survival center, and to really maximize the benefits you can get. You can help your thinking center finally do your healing center, right? So this is why talk therapy, people do talk therapy. They invest 2 years, and then they finally get to a point where they just say, I'm not getting anywhere. It doesn't work. I must just be broken. And no, that's not it. It's just talk therapy doesn't do this. Talk therapy is helpful for support. But you know what? I feel like I can talk with my girlfriends if I want to. I need this to stop. That's what I need. And so for me, I didn't choose the talk therapy route, and I don't specialize in the talk therapy route. Yes, I do talk. Yes, we do, because we have to target things. We have to figure out what we're looking at. And you use talking for that, right? But I find that the more we do the work, the more we don't need to know all the whys. Sometimes you do, because that's how you need to identify what you're working for and what you're looking at and how to target something. But it's really, we don't need to understand it fully as much as we need to get it. And if it's not in your thinking center yet, how can you understand it fully? Do you know what I mean? Like if it's in your survival center, you're just feeling it fully. Right? That's a different thing. And and we typically don't have problems with our problems. We can solve problems till the cows come home. We have problems with how we feel about our problems. And if they're too intense, if you have an anxiety, depression, or trauma disorder, your one significant problem is that everything is stuck in your limbic system. And you got to get that stuff moved from your limbic system to your survival center, to your survival center, your limbic system, into your thinking center. And because then you get to live from this part of the brain. This is your problem solver. This is the one that your morals. This is how you know how to thrive, right? This one is how you know how to survive. And surviving is not always that fun. It's just the bare minimum. And sometimes it's even destructive, right? And if you've been blocked in here, then that means that for however long your healing pathways have been blocked, there's a lot of buildup. There's a lot of dysfunction that comes from there, and that has to be cleaned up as well. So these things can be complex, and yeah, I mean, that's why with complex trauma, you're also looking at adding in function that wasn't wired during childhood, right? But still doesn't have to take long, especially because I meditate, not meditate, but I really think through how to stack benefits so that you can get results quickly and you're doing multiple layers of results at the same time. And so one of the things that I do in my program, I've stacked a lot of a lot of this work, especially cooling off the limbic system and moving a lot of information, with helping people reconnect with their emotions, with their body, with themselves. They reconnect with themselves, which is the exact platform you need to be able to start setting healthy boundaries. Because if you can't hear you, you don't know where your boundaries are and where they're not. And if you can't trust you, then you don't know what you're doing and you're running around confused, right? And so that's one of the things that comes in. But also, as you're healing, we're also working through your inner critic and getting that established well. And then there's one more that really I kind of was like, ha ha ha, you did this awesome work and you didn't even know. Okay, so mad scientist over here. But I can't remember what it was. It was so awesome. And I was like, yes. Because we can layer this stuff. But one of the other things that is really important, especially with people that come from generational trauma, is that they have a difficult time putting thoughts and feelings into words. And that's a particular function that helps with boundaries. It helps with communication. It helps with connection and relationships, because people can feel like there's lots of love around me, but I just can't feel it. I can't connect with it. And that's that, you got to repair those abilities again. And a lot of this work does that wiring and firing without even intentionally paying attention to it, right? And so there's so much. I mean, this doesn't have to take a long time. If you do this yourself, it's probably going to take you a long time. It took me 10 years. If you get mediocre help, it's still going to take you quite a lot of time. So really, when you're looking at this, you want to find people that are going to get you through this as soon as possible, because the most expensive time that the biggest expense that you have is living with unwellness. The faster you get through that, the more that you will be able to live at your fullest potential, live with a full cup, live without triggers and anxiety and depression controlling your life and influencing your relationships and harming things, right? Harming your babies, harming your business, harming the impact you could be having, making you withdraw, making you fight. That's expensive. That's the stuff your children carry on with you. That's the stuff that sets you back over and over again. That's the stuff that sabotages you, and that's expensive. Right? And when you don't have the emotional wellness, you're like emotionally bankrupt, right? And let me tell you what, if you had to choose between financial bankruptcy, emotional bankruptcy, and physical bankruptcy, I mean, let's throw financial bankruptcy right on out. I mean, that's just not a priority at this point. And really, your health is the most important thing you have going on for you, because there is nothing else. And if the thing that's blocking you is your emotional wellness, solve that problem. Do what it takes, solve that problem. And I know that that's kind of a thing to be in, but let me tell you what, when you invest in yourself, when you catch a vision for yourself, when you prioritize your emotional wellness, when you take that stand for you that only you can, and you start to see a return on your investment, it's big. I mean, it's like you just feel like $1 million. I know, because this is the route that I have taken. And you can't always rely on your insurance to help you through this, because their job is to keep costs down, and so they don't even, you got to look out for you, and you got to look out for what you're looking for. And so I really want to tell you, and think about what you can do. Think about what happens. I help people eliminate symptoms of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress in 2 to 6 months instead of 2 to 6 years. Okay. Now imagine what happens, what you can accomplish with the 1.5 years that you get saved, right? That you're saving yourself that much time. Now, and when you're going out there and you're looking for who you're going to work with, go with somebody who's going to get you results quickly, because this does not have to take a long time. It doesn't. And guess what? If you've got little kids, little babies, this is a perfect time to do this work. By the time they're older, they won't even know you had a mental health disorder. They won't even know that you had anxiety, depression, or traumatic stress, or all the symptoms. They won't even know that you used to talk terribly to yourself, and that you had low self-esteem, and you were doubting all the time, or that you were panicking, or that you were afraid to leave your house, or that you had no friends because you were insecure and worried, and you had regret, and you had remorse, and you kept getting stuck in the emotion place, and you couldn't get it. And even though this was saying, hey, we don't need to do that, this was so powerful that you really had no control, and you kept losing control, and you kept losing more control, and you couldn't trust yourself, and you couldn't depend on yourself because you didn't know when you were going to go into the weeds, and you didn't know if you were going to go into that dark place, or if you were going to spiral outward, if you were going to start screaming at people, if you were going to start falling asleep and staying asleep. Your children won't even know, right? Because by the time you're done, you're done. And then you have the tools to keep it going and to do whatever else you want to do. And let me tell you, you hang with the right people, and they just keep growing and keep growing and keep growing. And you just get pulled right along. It's really wonderful. The other thing, like if you have older kids, right? They've seen you struggle with this stuff, and they've picked it up, and they've learned that this is what life is like. But when you heal and change, you are perfectly positioned to create change in their lives as well, and to show them how to work through that and how to become something different. One of my clients is doing that right now. She's having conversations with her daughter, and she's realizing that, oh my gosh, I've been making up all these stories. I assume all this stuff for people. And she said, I'm just going to start asking them what they think. And then, so she started doing that, and she was like, oh, it wasn't about me at all. And so she's reprogramming, right? She's her, it's going through the thinking pathways, and she's learning, and she's free to discover and to learn. And then she's, hanging out with her kid, and she's seeing her kids doing the same thing she taught her kid to do. And so she says, hey, instead of making all that stuff up, which I understand why you're doing that, why don't you just ask her if that's really what's going on? And so now she's retraining her kid to do things in stuff based in reality instead of based in our imagination, which really increases our function in the world. And she has the courage to do it. And so this is really, really powerful. But also, I have clients that are business owners, and they're noticing that their anxiety is really standing in the way of the massive impact that they could be having. And as they move these things out of the way, their business goals are getting closer and closer and closer into their grasp. And the impact that they know that they're meant to create in this world is coming into fruition, right? Those are some of my newer clients, so we're still waiting for them to keep working through their things, but they've only been graduated for a couple months, so I'm cheering for them and all that fun stuff. But investing in yourself, really, you are your biggest and most important and best asset. Take a risk on yourself, see yourself, know yourself, put it in there, and get whatever help you need to resolve this. And let me tell you what, I do this work. I'm a professional. I am one of the best in the country. I rock and roll here. And there are times that I get help because I need another set of eyes. I had a specific mom issue, and my mom knows this, so when she watches this video, she'll be fine. But I had a specific mom issue, and I was working on it. I was doing my things, and I could not get through that block. And I was mad at her, and I could not call her. And I was like, I was feeling the guilt was adding on because I couldn't call her. And I was like, every time I thought about picking up the phone, anger. And so finally I was like, okay, Rachel, you got a problem here. What are you going to do about it? And so I got some assistance. I took like 6 sessions, and bam, done. And my relationship with my mom has been phenomenal, and like removed a lot of codependence, allowed my mom to be free to be her own woman. Imagine that. Because, anyway, I'm not going to make facetious jokes, mom jokes, but like, I don't know, no, I'm not going there. Mom issues, right? But when you can get on the healthy side, it's like, wow, look at me. And now she's free to be herself, she doesn't have to change to not trigger me. Right? I can be who I need to be regardless of who she's going to be. And that is so good for our relationship. I can't tell you. And, but I want you to know that this is absolutely possible. I want you to know that talk therapy will not get this. And I want you to know that it's not your fault that you're not getting results. It's not how the brain works. It's why people go to talk therapy for 10 years at a time, and they're still suffering. You know, it doesn't affect the part of the brain that gets the fast results, and it doesn't it doesn't affect the part of the brain that creates the problems that we're experiencing. Okay, so I want you to hear that, and I also want to put in your ear, your recovery journey can be cut into a fraction of the time, right? That's awesome. So I want you just to hear that. If this is something that you want to talk with me about, I invite you to book a call with me. I set aside time to talk with people, look a couple of hours every day to talk with people and really help you on your healing journey. I'll help you figure out what's not working, where you want to go, and help you create a plan to get there. And so because that's the most important thing, it's not going to be what you know, right? It's not going to be, you can't unlearn these things. You have to work with this part of the brain, and we can really put a plan together for you that impacts that part of the brain quickly. And and especially if this is something that you're going to do with me, what we're talking about is going into May and June, very, very different. Not having to wait till next year in 2021, making new resolutions to become emotionally well, or maybe stop the panic attacks. That this is something that you can accomplish, you can really cut into in the next 2 to 6 months. So if that's something that you're interested, go ahead and book a call with me by going to rachelmccloud.com/call, and I will call you at the time that you choose. And right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, because people are posting some things. So okay, and Rena says, and the part of the brain shuts down when the anxiety, depression, or mourning makes you shut down. Yeah, the survival center, when it's activated, when it decides, hey, I need to protect us, this isn't safe, it really will, it overrides your whole system. It will remove the electricity, the chemicals, and all that stuff, and shut down your thinking center. And it will really fire up in the survival center and send energy and blood flow to your arms and your legs, because that's where you need it to fight and to run or to faint, right? And so you don't get choices. Once you go into survival mode, you don't get choices. People feel like they're out of control. They're literally out of control. They do not have possession of their thinking center. They are in the animal part of the brain, or the reptile part of the brain. And so it really does make you shut down. And it can even put you to sleep. It can put you to sleep. It can make you dissociate. It can do anything with you that it chooses, and you don't get a choice. Once it goes into survival mode, it goes under the jurisdiction of that part of the brain. And that's what makes our interactions so dysfunctional, is because we're not thinking them through. I think the studies show it can go to as low as 20% of the this part of the brain. The activity there can be reduced to 20% of what it's capable of doing. And it's really hard to think when one part of your brain is trying to shut the thinking center down. And actually, that's one of the causes of irritability, is that your survival center, you start talking to this part of the brain, and usually logicking will do that. So if you try to logic with somebody who's in this part of the brain, they become irritable, because it's like, I already shut that part of the brain. Don't talk to me about that. I'm not talking about that. And they'll get irritable and they'll snap. And that's because of how the brain is functioning in those moments. It's not because that person's mean, or that person's such a B word or an a-hole. I love all the words, but PGing it. But it's because of how their brain is currently functioning, right? And that's so. If that's you, the fastest way to get out of that is to really do that work. So yes, and so when you do get into anxiety, depression, grief, mourning, it really does make you shut down and lose control. Awesome, Rena, thank you. So Matt asked, what are some tools we can use to reset neural pathways? I really don't think about it as a resetting. So I guess probably we are. I don't I kind of just do this in I guess that's the same, rebuilding, or look at me. This is what I do in my head at home. So and it's a complicated question because, shifting out of the survival center with something is helping, and you get it through the healing pathways, and this is what redoes the neural pathways, and this is the part of the brain that we want to fire and wire and really create and create new neural pathways. And I would give more tips on that, but it's such a complex thing that this is something that I really can't give you tips on. It's something I walk people through and I help them discover. And it's very specific to people. So I don't even know if I could lay out one process for that. So that's where I'm at with that. But you know what? I'm going to look out for more answers on that. And so, interesting. But yes, it really is about building those new neural pathways, because once those are set up, those are paved like, they're just automatic and they fire and wire. And that's where you get stuff to the subconscious level that your brain is like, oh, I know what we're doing here. I'm just going to do this. And that's how people can really encode healthy eating habits and their preferences and healthy communication. You can get that going through at such a deep level that you don't have to think so hard. You don't have to use so much willpower. What happens is when you're first learning this stuff, you got to kind of move a little bit slower, and you got to pay attention, and you have to really intentionally wire what you're wiring. And but as you do that, it starts to take place, it starts to connect, it starts to go, and the more you use it, I think a good rule is if you use that neural pathway about 3 times, it's really settled in there. Like the first time you say no, right? That's just one. Everything's set up now. Now you say no again. Now it's even more. And then the third time, usually that's like really all you need, especially if you're using some more, like some advanced strategies to really take that stuff deeper and clear the path for it. So there's that. Okay. And then Matt asked, how does acceptance play into this process? Fabulous question. Acceptance is like kind of the final parts of grief, right? And surprisingly, grief, maybe not surprisingly, but grief plays a big role in so much of what we're doing, because ultimately sometimes we're disappointed when we find out who we are in some ways. Like sometimes we find out that we're just like our mom, or we find out that we're just like our dad, and like not the good parts, or we find out that we're threatened by people, and we find out that that we will lie in a pinch, or we find out that we're not as good of a parent as we thought we were, right? And that's a grief, right? Because we lost what we thought would be. And we can be angry about that. We can go through all the things, right? But when you get to acceptance is really an empowering place. And there's lots of things that can block acceptance. And so I never try to make people do acceptance. If it's not a natural flow, we're not doing it. I'm not, because it's not real. And healthy people don't need to be guided into acceptance. It's a process. You flow into acceptance, just like you flow into forgiveness. You don't make people forgive. That's not forgiveness. That's, I don't know what that is. Coercion? I don't know. Fear? I don't know what that is, but I don't like it. And so when the work is done, those things just happen automatically. And the next thing you know, they say, oh my gosh, I actually forgive them. That's what I'm looking for. I want authentic, real, natural forgiveness and acceptance. And so, but when you get there, it's really empowering. Acceptance doesn't mean I like it, right? We can find parts of ourselves that we really don't like, or things that have happened in our lives, we can really not ever prefer it, right? We can say that's some crap and I don't like that. But when we get to acceptance, that usually comes when that event is no longer radiating pain. And the beautiful thing about this work is that this part of the brain can really strip any and all things of pain. It's really, I wouldn't believe it if I hadn't seen it over and over again. But that's what happens. And I didn't know that this was a thing. And there was sometimes I've seen people and been like, I don't know if they're going to get over this in the beginning of my work, and time after time after time, I just grow in my amazement of what the brain can do, because it can take some of the most horrible stuff and turn it into the same thing as like, oh, I went to dinner with my friends. Crazy, right? But that's a really empowering thing, instead of having something that every time it's opened, it's excruciating pain, excruciating pain. And so what I find happens is that once this moves into the thinking center and the pain is stripped away, because this part is like a digester, right? It's just like your stomach. It pulls stuff apart, it breaks it down, and hooks stuff back up, and it really, and then it eliminates it. It eliminates what it doesn't want, and pain is part of that. And so what I find is that as we can move things through the healing pathways, that part of the brain will move you through the process of acceptance. And when things get stuck in your survival center, you're stuck in a not healing cycle. You're stuck in different, like maybe the anger is like, maybe it was easy to work through the anger, but now you've got all the bargaining, right? And then you've got the denial. And then you've got, like, it can get hung up in any one of those things based on each individual's like construct, right? In like inner world construct, and that to me is just that it hasn't fully gone through the pathway. So really the job there, if you can't get into acceptance, then it's to get that through the healing pathways. And if it's, and then the acceptance just turns right on. So that's one piece. So acceptance is a very natural and authentic process that doesn't have to be forced or wished for. It just turns on. Or faked, or it's not one of those things you want to fake till you make it. That will keep you stuck in not forgiveness and not acceptance for a really, really long time. So acceptance in this process, I think more, I like to use ideas like allowing is synonymous with acceptance, like allowing myself to have been somebody who was threatened, or like allowing myself to have been one of the mean girls, allowing myself to have been, whatever it is, and accepting that I was that, accepting that happened. The more we run from things, the more we can't stand and hold them, the longer we stay in suffering. And it really is a counterintuitive thing. But I find that if you don't have strategies to desensitize things, to take the pain out before you face it, it can really knock you out and derail your whole healing process. And that's why I don't give a ton of information in these things, because this is big work. This is not, this is work that without the right support, you can send yourself into a really dangerous emergency mentally and emotionally. And so when we get into the finer pieces of this, this really is to be done with supervision. But it is that acceptance piece really is a very powerful thing. And, and it's also really important to accept your survival center, to accept your system's self-protection, right? I'm not taking away anyone's self-protection. That's there for a very specific reason that is unique to that person, and it's creating function. If we take that away, it's like if you've got this house and the door is kind of cracked open and they've got a broom under there, it's holding the roof up. Don't move the broom. Have you lost your mind? Like, oh, this doesn't belong here. Oh, this makes the house look bad. No, leave the broom, fix the roof, and then you can take the broom away, right? And that's the same thing with our inner world. It's like we have a lot of coping strategies that are not helpful, they're not cute, and they're causing problems, right? If you've got them, the thing to do is not get rid of them. The thing to do is do the work to solve the problem that those things are there for, that those coping strategies are there for. If you're emotionally eating and you're eating to manage your emotions, don't stop that, but better figure out your emotions and work through that and heal your traumas and your anxiety and your depression so that you don't need to do that eating thing anymore. And then it goes away easily. It's not a big deal. Right? But what do? We say, no, I'm getting so fat. Oh my God. And I got to stop and I've got to do this. And we're traumatizing ourselves and we're wasting time, right? You've got something in place, leave it there. Let's do the work. We'll be done 2 to 6 months, rock. And then you can stop eating. And the whole house isn't going to fall down, right? But we get caught up with lots of symptoms and we don't get to the root of the problem. So we just run around fighting symptoms, playing whack-a-mole with symptoms, and we're wasting time. And I get why that happens. And that's really one of the reasons why you want to get support, because you want to know what you're really supposed to be fighting and not just fighting everything because you just got to fight everything and you're in a limbic state and you're just in fight mode, right? So I think I answered that question. How does acceptance play into this process? Acceptance to me is a goal post, right? It's the we've reached the goal. Like when people move into acceptance, I'm like, okay, check. That one's done. Okay, where are we at now? Like acceptance and forgiveness really show the work is done. Never something that I force people into or that I have to force people into. So, um, oh, yay, Ebony, thank you for sharing your knowledge with us. Absolutely. She says, I struggle so much with forgiveness and acceptance because of my history of abuse. Yes. I also beat myself up horribly because I don't see myself as being a good person, even though others around me do. Yes. And this, what happens with the forgiveness and acceptance, that if you can't forgive and accept, that means that you have some emotional wounds, and that is, it's, these emotional wounds are stuck in the healing process, and so you don't get them through the healing pathways where you can start generating the forgiveness and acceptance. And that's the same thing with your self-concept, is that there are events that happen that are so painful that we just can't process them. But what we learn from them is negative stuff about us. And sometimes that's because people said things, and sometimes it's just childish thinking. We think that we're the cause of all the things. And then when we look around at what's wrong, well, it must be me, and it must be because I'm not good enough. It must be because I always mess things up. It must be because I ruin things. It must be because I opened my big mouth and then everything fell apart. And we can think that we're responsible for things. And so and that's okay, right? But what happens is it stays stuck over here in your survival center, and once it stays there, you don't get to change it, and it's really under the jurisdiction of that survival center that's pretty militant and won't let you have anything. It won't let you have it out of there. And so it's really important to get that through the healing pathways so that you can upgrade your self-concept and that it will match with reality. Because I think what happens is, you probably, Ebony, can understand that you're a good person, but the emotions you're generating are the self-doubt and I'm not a good person. And once you start that, your brain wants to help you, so it says, oh, we're looking at why you're not a good person. Okay, yeah, let me show you that. And that's that, I think it's called the reticular activating system, whatever, it's RAS system, but it filters in what you want to see, and it filters out the other stuff. And so it'll show you, oh, this is what's important to you, to know how you're not a good person. Okay, I got you. And it'll keep showing you how you're not a good person. But when you get this stuff through the healing pathways and you have the space to start changing your self-concept and start rebuilding new beliefs about yourself, which is a very natural part of the healing process. It's not something that has to be forced. There's some tricks you can do to make it happen faster, but it's just a natural. The upgrade of your self-image and self-confidence is a natural part of this and doesn't take that long. But where was I? You said, okay. But you can get that through the healing pathways, and it will start matching up with the reality. And all of a sudden now your belief systems change, and you're like, oh my gosh, I think I'm actually a good person. Like you can even say, I think I might be a good person. And your brain is like, oh, good person, that's what we're looking for. We're a good person. And it'll start showing you all the ways you're a good person. Now you're stacking beliefs about why you're actually a good person. And when you go look for it, I'm a good person, your brain says, all these things I collected, look, and it says, you're right. And now you actually feel, and you're generating the emotions of someone who believes that they're a good person. And that happens subconsciously, automatically, and it's fun. And it does not have to take a long time. So I just want you to know, this is powerful. This is awesome. This is one of the best things you can do. This is one of the best gifts you can give yourself. This is one of the best gifts you can give your children. This is one of the best gifts you can give your partner, is just really to get emotionally well. Because when you have these things that, like she said, I also beat myself up horribly, which is a compulsive behavior that is a survival strategy. Like your brain, Ebony, thinks that it's helping you, and that's what happens, because it doesn't do anything that doesn't think it's helpful. It doesn't have, the brain always has a reason. But when you see yourself as not being a good person, even though other people do, it's frustrating for the people that love you, because they want to talk with you about what they discovered about you and how awesome you are. And you're like, no. So it's a way you can't connect. They can't connect with you. And so it's really frustrating for both parties, because they're both working from two different realities and two different perspectives, and you can't connect. And that's really hard. And it trains them, oh, I just can't connect with her on that level, And then you're missing out on so much of the good in your life. And that's one of the biggest tragedies of all of this, is that there's so much good around us all the time, but because of our own inner world and our own belief system, we're filtering out a lot of the good because our brain is set on showing us what's going on with our emotional stuff. And you can feel like a Debbie Downer, but this part of the brain's function is to go find your problems and fix them. So it's like this one's very focused on what's wrong. And if it's got stuff that's over there, it's not wrong, that's not good, it's going to keep always bringing up negativity to you. And that's why people are like, oh no, be positive, be positive, be positive. This part of the brain does not want to hear that. It's like, no, I need to get in there. I need to heal that. And you're like, no, be positive. And you're just blocking the work that it could be doing. And it's frustrating for you because you have to work so hard just to be positive, just to be positive. And then you take a break and your brain's like, finally, I'm going to go find that thing that was so bad and we're going to work on that. Right? And you're at war inside all the time, just not linking up. It's like, you know what? If we can help this part of the brain by working with this part of the brain, we can help this part of the brain do the work it wants to do. And what happens is once it heals the wound, it keeps looking for more problems. And so what happens is it opens up and all of a sudden it finds positive things. Like, oh, they weren't such a bad person after all. Or maybe they were some good there too. Or, yep, that was all pretty bad. And then it keeps opening up. And then it says, oh yeah, but I had that one teacher and she was really awesome. And now you're pulling from your past whatever was good. It's really phenomenal because that's another thing I don't do, is I don't make people be positive when they're not positive. Because positivity is a natural function of wellness. If you're not positive, there's a problem. We got to go find that problem, fix it, and guess what? All of a sudden, you're going to be positive. You know? And so it's like we're just like, no, be positive, no, be positive. It's like, this doesn't take a long time. Let's just deal with it and move on. You know? It's like going into a hoarder's house and say, oh no, it's clean, it's so clean. Look, I have this little square right here, it's so clean. Lies. Your brain knows that you're lying to it. It knows. And so, sometimes it's good. Get in there, resolve it, move on. And then you can go, there's so many wonderful, positive focused programs, or positive focused like meditation. Like once you clean this stuff up, you can actually meditate. Like I can actually meditate. I actually do this. It happens. I never could have done that. But now that my brain isn't going to all this stuff, it's like I can actually quiet my mind and have a good trip in there. I know, a good trip. So, and that's what's possible. And there's more that's possible. There's just a right time. If you've got a disorder, if you've got symptoms of anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress, those need to be dealt with. And it doesn't have to take a long time. And once you're done, because it is permanent, because it just gets through the healing pathways. That one does all the work. Okay. So, Ebony says yes, I call it the domino effect because one bad thought leads to hundreds more and I can't control or process them before more come into play. And then I'm depressed, more anxious, and my panic attacks kick in. Yes, I didn't mean to make this an hour-long video, but I mean, you guys are talking about some really fascinating things. So this is a domino effect because one thought can be very triggering. And once it starts triggering distress, it just steamrolls from there. And it's generating a lot of emotion that needs to be processed. And this part of the brain can really be involved in that. It's like pulling it out. It's like, yeah, let's do this. And it wants to go look at all this stuff, but it's like your survival center is getting in there and messing stuff up and not letting it get through. And it's like, give that back to me. And they're fighting. And that's that anxiety. And then there's, it's just spinning around and it's just a mess. And these parts of your brain are not functioning well. And that's why when we want to restore healthy brain function. And that's why that when you do this kind of work, you can look at your brain under MRI and it actually it's functioning differently than what it functions when you're in that survival state. And so we can restore it so that it starts functioning in a healthy fashion, in a healthy way. So, and the depression comes on because depression is like the symptoms get so high and there's so much pain, whether it's grief or it's guilt or it's sadness or it's I'm a terrible person. It gets so intense that it's kind of like the sprinkler system. Like your system just gets on there and like pushes it down in depression. Like we need to shut this stuff down, like kind of push it down and really suppress it. We got to get that pain. So you start numbing, you start avoiding because you can't go towards the things that will activate you, because then the pain will start popping back out again. And so it really puts, and so I look at depression as just saying, hey, we're in a lot of pain here and we can't handle it. It's so we're putting a lid on it. And then we're going to squish the lid down and keep squishing the lid down. And that's a really painful place for humans to be, because we thrive when we have all of our emotions. But when our emotions are harming us, then we needed the next strategy, which is depression. Right? And so this is really anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress all have to do with the brain's inability to process whatever material's there. You know? So, yeah. And then, yeah, absolutely. Then there's more anxiety and panic attacks. So it is absolutely a very vicious circle, and one you can get out of. And you know, the more you have, the more work elbow grease you're going to have to use, right? Because if your healing process has been blocked for 3 decades, you got to unblock that. Again, it doesn't have to take a long time if you put if you have the right strategies and interventions and guidance, right? But if not, what, you're on like the 3-year plan? You know what I can do in 3 years? Anyway, I know, you know what you can do in 3 years? I don't even know. Like the healthy version of you, what can you do and what can you accomplish in 3 years' time? And are you going to give that up to anxiety and depression and traumatic stress? I hope not. So there's my sassy face. But I'm for real. I'm for real. This is not something to keep around. And I want to put this bug in your ear because I want you to demand more. You know, a lot of all this world is driven by consumers, you know, and if consumers have low expectations, you're going to get low products. And that's just going to frustrate you and keep leading you away and wasting your valuable time and energy. And if you've got anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress, your energy is one of the most valuable commodities you have, because anxiety, depression, and traumatic stress can suck that thing dry quick, because it takes a lot of energy to be depressed and anxious and traumatized. So that's what I got to say. I'm going to jump off because I'm going to go get home. But it was really wonderful talking with you guys, and I will see you around. Take care. Good night.